Our theme for the year for our 10th anniversary of Ethisphere, it's the 8th Global Ethics Summit, but the 10th anniversary of Ethisphere, is raising the standards of corporate integrity. And I cannot think of two better people to speak to that than our opening panel today. I was fortunate enough to be at a small BELA event. BELA is our membership organization, the Business Ethics Leadership Alliance, that GE was kind enough to host at the end of January. And Alex Dimitrief came in and gave some remarks at that roundtable. And one of the things he said that I have been saying almost nonstop since the end of January is 10 minutes of a conversation with a senior leader can be more effective than 40 hours of training, right? It's such an easy thing to think about, and it's such a hard thing to do. So I'm tremendously excited that we have Alex here to talk a little bit about what that means to weave integrity into everything that we have. And with him to lead that conversation is Neal Hochberg, who is the Senior Managing Director and Global Leader of FTI's practice. And so without further ado, to keep us on schedule, I'd like to welcome both Alex and Neal to the stage.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction there, Neal. Before we get started, I'd just like to say congratulations to the 13 companies that are on the world's most ethical companies list this year, and also congratulations to the 13 companies that have been on the list 10 times together with us. We're proud to be on the same list as a lot of leading companies, and we're proud to be part of a truly inspirational organizational effort.
Great, and on behalf of FTI, we're happy to be here. This is our first year of involvement, and the session this morning is going to be more question and answer. I will ask the questions. Alex, of course, an expert in the field, will be providing the commentary. So, good morning, everyone, and Alex, good morning. I thought to begin our conversation, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your personal story, your path to the role of General Counsel at GE, some of your responsibilities, how large your department is, and any advice you may give to aspiring GCs in the audience.
Okay, well, we'll start off with that easy one. I'll try not to go all the way back to Montreal in 1959, but I think that, my interest in ethics and leadership really traces back to my White House fellowship that I did after I graduated from law school. So I worked in the Office of Political and Governmental Affairs in the Reagan White House for Mitch Daniels, who was then the assistant to the president for political affairs. And back then, there was a pretty contentious debate already about ethics and about whether the business community subscribed to ethics. And there were some pretty heated discussions. Now, heated discussions back in 1985 and 1986 are pretty tame compared to today's standards. And I'd say that it was a really civilized and thoughtful debate. But that's what really got me thinking about the importance of integrity, the importance of ethics, and my desire to always be with a company that I could be proud to be part of. And I went from there to Kirkland & Ellis, and I was at Kirkland & Ellis for 21 years. I loved that law firm. It was a great place that trained me how to be a lawyer. It's a wonderful institution. And I represented a lot of clients, and I'd say they fell into two buckets. One bucket was people who had done nothing wrong and deserved a defense of the sort that we were able to provide them. And the other bucket were people who had been at companies where things had gone terribly wrong. And it's hard not to take away from seeing both types of experiences the importance of a culture of integrity and compliance. So then I'm minding my own business one day back in 2006, and I get a call about coming to GE. I had never represented GE. We'd actually sued GE a couple times. So I took it as the ultimate compliment that they called me. And I joined GE because of its tradition of integrity and compliance. And you talked about the work that Ben Heineman had done. You talked about the work that Brackett had done. I'm really privileged to follow in their footsteps. I actually have a picture that I'm always going to cherish, of a picture of the three of us. And we're talking on stage, and everybody says, "Oh, geez, what kind of pearls of wisdom were Ben and Brackett communicating to you at the dinner?" And I said, "Well, actually, they just told me not to screw it up." But that's where I met Al Rosa, who I know is here. And Al's our director of compliance. And Al taught me the importance of process, the importance of how you implement a culture of integrity, the mechanics of it, in a company, that does business in 165 countries with over 300,000 employees. And so I learned a lot from Al, and I've admired his leadership over the years and everything we've done from there. And my first job was litigation and compliance, and so that was when I immersed in the topic. And I did that for 5 years, and then I went to energy. And at GE Energy, our main markets, places like Russia, India, China, challenging jurisdictions, the kind of jurisdictions where you get headlines that you usually don't like. And again, I was proud to be part of a company that does business in jurisdictions like that in the right way and helps other like-minded companies bring the rule of law with humility to jurisdictions like that. So that was a terrific experience for me. And then I went to GE Capital for 3 years, right in the wake of the financial crisis. And boy, talk about being held to high standards, and understandably so. The country was still angry with the financial services industry for almost taking everybody over the cliff during the financial crisis. And so regulators rightfully had extremely high expectations. And again, working with our leadership to make sure that we met those standards was a privilege, and it was the right kind of thing to do. And then now I'm general counsel, and I benefit from having a great team, and I benefit most importantly from having colleagues on the business side who share our commitment to integrity, exemplify it, and make our jobs pretty easy. And I think that's the way to go. In terms of advice to aspiring general counsel, I'd just say maybe one or two things. The first is transparency. Just talk with your teams, talk with your clients, let people know what's on your mind. Explain your reasoning. I always say that a lot of ways being a good general counsel or being a good chief litigator or being a good in-house lawyer is a lot like doing algebra back in 6th grade. Teachers always wanted to see your work. And when you share your work and you explain to internal clients and customers why you believe that a certain position is the way to go, it goes a whole lot better than just doing it by diktat from a general counsel. So be transparent, be patient, and explain why you want to do what you want to do. And be humble. I think that I tell my team that I make 10 mistakes a day. And in today's world where you're moving at lightning speed, you're rarely ever going to have immaculate conceptions in a whole lot of areas. And so people are going to make mistakes. And I think it's about how you react when you make a mistake, whether as a leader you're willing to acknowledge the mistake, learn from the mistake, give other people an opportunity to learn from the mistake, that really makes a difference. And I always say that to me, what really differentiates GE from other companies in a lot of respects is how we respond and how we look at mistakes as an opportunity to learn lessons and do it right the next time.
Great. That opens the door to so many questions, but the first comes to mind, you alluded to the fact that, 300,000 people, 165 countries, multiple businesses, many of which are bigger than many of the, of the largest U.S. multinationals. How do you work through the compliance and regulatory issues that challenge each one of these businesses?
So we invest, and we make a significant investment in compliance. And so we have processes that we're really proud of. We're still trying to find the right balance between extensive and complicated versus keeping simple. And that's always a tough balance to do. But Al heads up a compliance and integrity team working out of our headquarters that coordinates with compliance teams and the general counsels in each business. And so we have a combination of a centralized approach that provides basic information and basic principles like the spirit and letter and other tools that we use out of corporate that spread their way out to the business. But we also rely on the business teams to bubble up issues through business-specific teams. And it's the marriage of those two teams that makes the compliance team work. So we have our shared processes, we have our shared training, we have our online programs, we have our in-person programs, we have a pretty regimented program that Al oversees. And I'd say that that's an important element of it. But the second way that you make it work in 165 plus countries and 330,000 employees is by keeping it as simple as you can. And the way that we do that is we just focus on integrity. And, as I said at the Bella meeting, the best insurance policy that you have is an overriding commitment from the top to the bottom of your company to integrity. That doesn't mean you never make mistakes. It doesn't mean that you ever don't have issues that you need to address, but it means that all in all, your touchstone continues to be integrity and doing business the right way. And if you just stick to that simple message, and Jeff Immelt, our CEO, talks about it every single officers meeting, our leaders talk about the importance that they place on integrity and doing business the right way at their staff meetings, at their town halls, and everywhere else. If you just focus on that basic message, that gets you a lot of the way there.
So you talk about training, and you talk about tone at the top, and you talk about reiterating the message, on a regular basis. Can you share some best practices with your experiences working? Because I know you work with other companies and governments in many challenging markets, and anything you could share in terms of how you go about that, some of the best practices,
Sure.
how you pick your partners.
I think that the guiding principle in many ways is transparency. And I think it's having open lines of communication to enforcement agencies and other regulators around the world, where 9 out of 10 of our interactions are initiated by us, where we talk about issues we have, where we talk about problems that we've seen, or we talk about initiatives that we're about to undertake. I remember that when we were negotiating a joint venture in Russia in our energy business, we spent a lot of time at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, because we just wanted our government to understand the steps we were taking in order to do business appropriately. And I remember the conversation, where I said, I can't promise you that everything's going to go completely perfectly, but here's our objective, here's how we're doing it. And I think just making that investment of time, and again, being transparent and talking about what we're going to do, buys you a lot of goodwill. And it's a good process. And again, showing your work and going through the process can't ever hurt. And I think it buys you a lot of credibility as you go in and do things like that. But I think it's also roundtables like we did at Bella, where we had 15 leading companies that are our equal in terms of their commitment to integrity, just get together as general counsel and get together as chief compliance officers and share best practices. I mean, this isn't an area where we ought to be competing with each other. This is an area where we ought to be learning from each other. We all benefit from rule of law. We all benefit from a system of integrity. And I think sharing best practices, sharing our perspectives on the right balance between complexity and simplification only makes us all better to our mutual benefit. So I think this is an area, again, where more communication, more transparency, more interaction only helps.
And you bring up an interesting point about shared values amongst competitors. Can you shed some light on some of the competitors you are facing in some of the emerging markets, some of the higher risk markets that maybe aren't subject to the same level of scrutiny, or just aren't as compliant as GE is? How does that impact your entry into certain markets? How does that impact your competitive advantage or disadvantage?
I think in the short term, in certain instances, I think it can hurt a company like GE. But what counts is the medium and the long term. And I think there are certain transactions that a company that's committed to integrity does just as well not winning. And I think it reinforces the value of integrity. I'll be honest with you, there are times when it's immensely frustrating to compete in continents like Africa, where we're competing with companies that don't have the same commitment that we do to integrity. And it's hard, and it often does offer a short-term advantage. It's hard to compete on an uneven playing field. And so it can be frustrating for our business leaders, it can be frustrating to me, it can be a frustrating series of conversations. But in the end, time and time again, we've learned that having a long-term commitment to integrity and being one of the companies, and I want to emphasize one of the companies, not the only company, but being one of the companies that government officials in Africa and other continents know they can trust to do business the right way. Know that in the long run, they will not betray their trust of their people by doing a contract with GE, is a huge advantage for us. And it's a huge advantage for other companies that subscribe to integrity. So when you're in the business that GE's in, we're thinking about our shareholders and what's going to happen for us for the next 100 years. We're not thinking about this quarter or a number in 2016. We're thinking about what kind of company we want to be. That's a luxury that we have at GE, but I tell my team that I'm at a stage in my career, I'm 57, where what I care about almost more than anything is whether my kids are proud of me for working at GE. And they are proud of me working for GE because we do things like export affordable healthcare, affordable transportation, affordable and clean energy to places in the world that desperately need them. And we do them in a way that delivers those products to customers, including state-owned enterprises, who can count on GE to be there when they need us and count on GE to do things the right way. We make our share of mistakes, but there's no question about our commitment and what we're trying to do over the long term. And in the end, companies who subscribe to that philosophy are going to come out ahead. And I think time has proven that.
All right, so on that point, what would you share in terms of your experience with this balance of complete integrity and ethical behavior and financial performance, particularly when you've got general managers, divisional presidents, et cetera, that are looking at trying to meet financial targets? How do you balance that?
So, to me, I don't really think there is a balance. I think that the two coincide. I mean, I think that, conceivably, I could see a business school case study where in the abstract you'd have a short-term trade-off between, compromising on an ethical issue and a short-term financial gain or some kind of contract, but my view is that always comes back to get you. And that it is a false trade-off. I mean, to me, the idea that you're going to get away with something or that you're going to be able to get that short-term gain and not have it come back to you in 2 or 3 very expensive ways is illusory. I mean, first, there's the cost of defending yourself. And I think that if you look at what's happened to any number of companies that have been involved in big FCPA scandals or FCPA accusations, even when they turn out to be unfounded, hundreds of millions of dollars of expenses, thousands of hours of time. And when you're in the kind of world that we're in right now, where every minute matters, and customers and governments and industries are moving at light speed, devoting hundreds of hours of senior management time to retrospectively revisiting activities over the last 6 years is such a waste. I mean, it's necessary, but, talk about opportunity cost. Mm-hmm. And then, in the end, it's that hit to your integrity. Once you abandon that commitment to integrity, people will look at you differently. When they negotiate with you in the back of their mind, they always say, boy, can I count on this company to keep my company safe? Is this the kind of company that I want to entrust with my reputation? Because they have a lot at stake, too. So to me, I don't think there is a trade-off. And again, I welcome anybody to show me any study, but I think there is a 100% correlation between integrity and profitability.
And I assume long-term sustainability as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So you've been in this for quite some time. What could you share about some of the changes that you see in the whole anti-corruption environment over the last 5 years or 10 years or so?
So I'd say, 2 or 3 big trends. The first is that it's become an international issue. The Justice Department and the SEC in the United States for years took the leadership in this area and in effect became almost the anti-corruption regulator for the world. And I think it always struck people in other countries as a little bit counterintuitive that the United States was somehow policing business practices in Nigeria or Russia or elsewhere. And it didn't really sit well, I think, with a lot of people in other countries. And what we see now is international cooperation among enforcement agencies. Some people call it cooperation, other people call it competition. I guess it depends on your perspective. But now when you're dealing with something in Europe, you have the Serious Fraud Office in the UK, my favorite name for an agency in the whole world. Very British. You have Chinese regulators, you have Russian regulators, You have an anti-corruption ministry in Nigeria that's become increasingly aggressive, and the anti-corruption ministry in Saudi Arabia that has become increasingly aggressive. So I think that, again, it is now something where we welcome the fact that the rest of the world is now applying standards similar to those that the Justice Department has been applying around the world. And again, I think it benefits companies with a commitment to integrity, but that's a huge change. I think the second thing is that as we become immersed in the internet, and we become immersed in a world where data flies around the world in nanoseconds. It never occurred to me when I was a young lawyer that you could email a document from an iPad walking around Shanghai to somebody back in the United States while you're walking down the street. But think about what that means in terms of how fast decisions have to be made. Things progress at lightning speed. And so teams like ours, when you're doing a deal in a challenging jurisdiction, have to be ready to move quickly because things move so much faster than they did even 5 years ago. And so we find ourselves confronting decisions that have to be made on a moment's notice on a Thursday afternoon or a Friday afternoon at the close of business someplace else in the world, where we have an hour to evaluate an issue that we probably used to have a week to think about. And you just have to be ready, in order to be an effective legal function, an effective compliance function. You have to be ready to move at the same speed as the business. You have to learn how to adapt your advice and speed it up and be ready, which means doing your homework ahead of time and putting a premium on quick analysis and being able to live with some uncertainty. But it's just moving so much faster. So it's not for the faint of heart, I guess is what I'd say. It's getting more challenging rather than less challenging. But the companies that have figured this out and who have made the investments up front in the type of personnel you need to anticipate, address, and work on these issues as they arise, rather than showing up one day and saying, oh my goodness, we need to worry about an anti-corruption program, those are the companies that are going to do great in this environment. And I'm really confident about our future. I just love what we're doing.
Great. And then we touched on it, and you alluded to, doing business around the world, both interacting with government, but also interacting with a lot of other business partners in different, which adds to the complexity as well. Do you have any particular processes in place to deal with both governmental agencies and third-party partners?
Well, I think we do have, a workflow that we get into. There are certain jurisdictions in the world where you still have to do business through channel partners and through local representatives. Mostly because you can't have the distribution network around the world. It's just not cost effective. And we do have a fairly robust process where our teams do due diligence on channel partners and evaluate their suitability to be trusted with our reputation and to be trusted to do transactions. And so we have that due diligence process, and then we have training programs, and we have regular communications with our partners. And again, it's truly a sense of partnership. And our initial assessment is really about making sure that those channel partners and those third parties that are going to work with us share our commitment to integrity. And so, we invest some time in it. And again, we take advantage of the technological tools that have become available, and we've speeded up our process, and we've tried to keep it at the right level of simplicity versus complexity, but it's still an important part of that process. And then again, I think that our policy with governments is to err on the side of disclosure. And I'm proud of the fact, again, that I don't have any hard numbers to back this up, but my gut tells me that 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 of our communications with governments around the world are initiated by GE. And all I can say is that when you're calling an agency, the conversation usually goes a heck of a lot better than when the agency's calling you. And I think, again, being forthright, having a predisposition towards self-disclosure and a predisposition towards giving hard-working professionals at agencies a heads up on issues as you see them coming up, buys you a lot of goodwill, helps make their job easier, and it's the right thing to do.
Great. You mentioned simplicity, and this has come up, I guess, a couple of times. So I guess you were quoted that something along the lines, I hope this is pretty accurate, simpler compliance is better compliance, shorter codes of conduct, shorter and principles-based policies and fewer but better training sessions are more effective. So can you, kind of expound upon the processes, the policies, procedures you see as being critical to ensuring that simplification really does lead to better compliance?
Sure. So let me come at it this way, because I think, it's an interesting issue, because I think everyone's instinct is that as the world becomes more complicated and comes faster and you go into more countries, you need more process. You need more workflows, you need more tools. And I guess my answer to that would be that it is a mistake to treat an ethical failure as a failure of process. When someone strays from principles of integrity, it would be unfortunate if the reaction, as it sometimes is, would be, oh, if we only had another workflow that would have caught that. Oh, if we'd only had one more approval that would have been required. Because to me, that excuses misconduct. And to me, I would rather just call it for what it is, which is an ethical failure or a lapse of integrity. And when you talk about integrity and you talk about doing business the right way, it's really not that complicated. You don't need a 125-page code of conduct. Enron, my first day of business at GE, our chief accounting officer stopped by and gave me a copy of Enron's Code of Ethics. And it was beautiful. It was a glossy 45-page brochure that said all the right things, had great pictures, flow charts, everything else. And we all know what happened there. So it's not about the rules, and it's not about how many you have. It's whether people take them seriously and whether people really believe in them. So to me, and as we were talking about at the Bella conference a couple months ago, to me, 10 minutes from a CEO, 10 minutes from a CFO, 10 minutes from me at a staff meeting or at a town hall talking about why integrity is important to us, why it's important to GE, and why we're counting on everybody not to let each other down is worth thousands of hours of online training. It's worth a 300-page code of conduct manual. And it's not, it's not because I don't take it seriously, it's precisely because I do take it seriously that I say we need to focus on that core message and in some ways keep it simple. When I look back on the great failures of business in the last 10 years, and there have been a great number of them, not a single one is because the business didn't have a code of conduct. Not a single one is because the business didn't have workflows and approval requirements and qualified general counsel and great compliance officers. It's because people lost their way. It's because people didn't understand that there was an overriding obligation to integrity. Or, even more frequently, they exhibited terribly bad judgment under stressful circumstances. But it wasn't because there weren't enough rules. And it's not because they didn't get enough training. I mean, there's probably a few exceptions to that. I tend to exaggerate to make a point here. So there's probably exceptions. Of course you need basic training. Of course you need to make sure that people understand rules. But in the end, what you really need is you need your business leadership to talk about integrity. And if I could just keep going here for a second, I guess the other point that I'd really make there is that for an integrity program to truly be effective, it has to come from the CEO, not from the general counsel. Face it, guys. I have the gift of gab, and I love going to town halls, and I love talking to our employees, but they expect to hear that from me. They expect to hear from me as their general counsel that we care about integrity. But when Jeff Immelt talks about integrity, when Jeff Bornstein, our CFO, talks about integrity, when Keith Sharon, my CEO at GE Capital, talks about integrity, that's when people really listen. That's when people really understand that integrity matters. And then the other great failing that companies have had And almost every single instance, including the debacle at Volkswagen right now, gets traced back to a breakdown in open reporting. And I think, that the study that was done about the LIBOR scandal at Barclays was particularly illuminating on this, where they said that in the end, the problem was that employees at Barclays, and you can substitute any number of names there, didn't feel that it was safe and valued for them to raise their concerns. And to me, at GE, our very best early warning system, the key to our success, are our employees. They have an uncanny sixth sense for when something's not right. And, look, guys, 330,000 employees, 165 plus countries, it's not always right. And we count on our employees to raise their hands and elevate issues, not only integrity issues, but every kind of issue. And that is the key to our success, which is knowing the leadership at GE values when our employees bring problems to other people's attentions. The tragedy of the Volkswagen debacle, and the evidence isn't in yet, but I think we all know enough to say that it's distressing that all it would have taken was one employee for her or him to raise her or his hand and bring that issue to the attention of one senior executive who would have listened. All it would have taken was two people, and it would have avoided untold damage to a brand that was the proudest in the automobile industry for years and years and years. I look at that and I'm just sick to my stomach about what's happened and all the employees at Volkswagen and how this group that manipulated the software on the pollution testing has done unspeakable damage to so many careers and so many families because of what happened there. It's truly sad. And an open reporting system would have prevented it.
Right. And so in the interest of time, that thought leads into, how do you as a senior executive in such a large company feel comfortable that the human element, that people do have the confidence, because the processes are in place, the reporting lines are in place. What gives you confidence that, the human aspect of people doing the right thing up and down the organization is really there and reinforced?
We measure it. We measure it. So we do a survey every year, the GE Employee Opinion Survey, GEOS. And one of the questions that's in there every year is whether our employees feel confident that they can raise concerns without fear of retaliation. And we track that number. We look at every business. We look at every country. We look at every manager, and we see how their team's doing. And we are sticklers for high grades here. And when we see trends that we don't like, when we see a number that sticks out, we go to that business unit and we make clear that the leader understands that it's on him or her to make sure that their employees feel comfortable about raising concerns. And so we look at that number, we look at our trends, we look at what we see in our system, we track it, and to us, the more concerns that are raised, the better. When we see the trends going the wrong way, we act and we look into it and we investigate. So we talk the talk, but we also walk the talk in terms of investing the time and energy necessary to make sure the system's working the way it can. Again, it's so important, Neal, that you can't take it for granted. You really have to test it, and you have to make sure it's working the way that you need it to.
Fantastic. We have probably another hour, 2 or 3 we could go through, but in the interest of time, I want to thank you. And
hey, thanks, Neal. Congratulations again to all the companies that made the world's most ethical companies list. It's a real honor to be here, and I hope you have a great couple days. Thanks to Tim and the whole team for everything that Ethisphere is doing for all of us, because it's a tremendous help, and it's something I think we can all be proud of. And the fact that there's 440 people here today is just a testament to how many companies are committed to doing business the right way, which is great for all of us. So thanks for your time, guys.
Thanks.